Mr. Stevenson was a leading criminal lawyer. He wore 2 gold earrings in his left ear and was well known for representing clients involved in unusual cases.
This story has all the salacious details that newspaper editors just love. A prominent gay criminal lawyer, Derrance Stevenson, shot in the back of the head.
The macabre circumstances surrounding his death were disclosed at a news conference at police headquarters this morning.
The members of the Major Crime Squad found that the lid of the deep freeze had been sealed with a very effective adhesive.
This case rattled Adelaide's legal profession to its core, and to this day, the case dubbed "The Body in the Freezer" remains an urban legend.
The partially clothed body was frozen solid in a crouched position when police prized open the freezer about 5 o'clock last night.
There's little doubt the killer or killers knew what they were doing.
Police took possession of 2 rifles to determine if they were connected with the murder.
The victim shot at point-blank range, and the crime scene then carefully cleaned.
Police officers throughout the state were alerted yesterday to look out for Mr. Stevenson's sports car. It was later located in the opal mining settlement of Coobapedy in the far north. Detectives have been questioning a young man who was found in possession of the car.
That young man was David Szach, Derrance Stevenson's young lover. The jury finds him guilty of murder and he serves 14 years in prison. But there's one problem. For 4 decades, David has insisted he didn't do it.
I did not kill Derrance Stevenson. I played no part whatsoever in his murder.
Now he wants my help to clear his name. And it will lead me into a terrifying world of abductions, killings and cover-ups that go to the highest echelons of South Australia. I'm a journalist and an author, have been for 30-odd years. I've written 8 books, mostly true crime, including the Snowtown book, The Bodies in the Barrel, which was terribly gruesome, and the family court murders, which helped put a guy into court after 33 years. Part of the reason I got into this was because I helped track down my own partner's killer. David and I do share something in common, yeah. We both had partners who were murdered. David's partner, Derrance Stevenson, was murdered in '79, and my partner, Ron Jarvis, was murdered in '92. A few years apart, but pain doesn't change. Oh, I was determined. I was so determined to get him.
It took 2.5 days, but the jury eventually found Standage guilty of murdering Ronald Jarvis at Nugent in 1992.
You know what it did? It honed that sense for me of justice and how important it is that people get justice. I doubt that he will see the sky as a free man, and I think we should all breathe a sigh of relief for that. I'm still a true crime journalist. That's what I do. I go in and relook at cold cases or miscarriages of justice and see what can be done and see if police got it wrong or maybe they got it right. Just take a look at this photo. The police say that this is a cold-blooded killer. To me, he just looks like an innocent kid.
Yeah, he looks like the boy next door.
Premeditation and motive. That was the police case. They said that David Szach at 19 shot Derrance Stevenson, shoved his body in the freezer with or without help because Derrance was going to leave him for someone else. They built this case against him, built on fingerprints found all over the freezer.
And there was gunpowder residue all over his hands.
And then he takes Derrance's prized, low-slung sports car And he drives like a bat out of hell through to Coober Pedy, which is 900 k's in winter.
And why would you do that in the dead of the night?
I don't think you would. David's story, on the other hand, is completely different. He says there was no motive, there was no premeditation. They were happy, they were in love. He says the entire case is circumstantial and that he is totally innocent.
I didn't do it, and it's got nothing to do with me.
There's been a lot of scuttlebutt and rumour which backs up David's side of the story, and that's been going on for about 40 years. Word on the street was that Derrance was involved with some sinister people and some sinister dealings.
And David was framed.
And David was framed.
I just asked him the question, Dave, did you kill Derrance? And I thought he's taken the rap for this to safeguard himself.
Do you think he helped put the body in the freezer?
No. I think that body was put in that freezer to set him up.
He's the fall guy, he's the one that's going to take the rap and make sure that everyone else that's in power comes out squeaky clean.
This voice said, look, we're very sorry what's happening. We'd like to help, but we just can't.
Something is not right, and other people are involved in that conviction.
It's also now known that David's trial in 1979 was potentially flawed due to a botched scientific formula used by South Australia's chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Colin Manock, to help calculate the all-important time of death.
You're thinking, now wait a minute, this is not science at all. This is actually an abuse of science.
In 2018, the Parliament of South Australia heard that a world-leading authority on the timing of death based upon post-mortem temperatures said Dr. Manock's calculations were speculative, ill-founded and cannot be substantiated. Do you believe that the conviction is now in doubt?
I certainly do. There is absolutely no doubt about that.
Because of the bungled forensics, David now hopes to overturn his conviction under new right of appeal legislation. But, as I'm about to learn, for David, time is running out. David.
Debbie.
Hello.
Good to meet you.
You too. That's good. Have a seat. Thank you for coming to me, asking me to have a look.
Thank you.
Why are you talking about it now? Why do you want to? I know you've been talking about it for a long time, but is there some urgency now for you? Or?
I've been diagnosed with motor neuron disease over a long period of time, so there's no certainty that in 12 months' time I'll still be here. Obviously, my health is continuing to decline. I've gone from one life sentence to a death sentence, so, that's quite something in one's lifetime. I have two sons also, so I need to be very conscious that at some point in time, this will become something that they'll think about a bit more. Here we go. Here we go.
Oh, good, look.
That's,
he's taller than you.
That's Samuel.
Ah.
That's my eldest son.
Good-looking boys.
Yeah, Robert is more like me, as in he's very resourceful and he's got a lot of initiative.
So, David, I think we both need to be really clear about what it is that I'll be doing.
Yes.
It's really important. If I come out the other end, out of this rabbit burrow, and I think that the jury got it right, then that's what I'll be saying.
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
I'm totally appreciative just of your help.
David Szach's been screaming from the rooftops since he got out of prison all those years ago that he's an innocent man. Would a guilty man keep talking about the fact that he didn't murder his partner and attract attention to himself? If you were guilty, wouldn't you just lay low and shut up? And be grateful that your sentence was finished? And this investigation isn't just about David Szach, because if he didn't shoot Derrance Stevenson, then I want to find out who did.
I think that Derrance deserves to be known other than the body in the freezer because he really was a lovely man.
He was flamboyant. People like flamboyant people, don't they?
He was an unusual, odd type of person.
The best word I can think of is eccentric. He was different.
And then there was that house. It looked like a sailing ship. And people would use it as a reference point.
Couldn't have been a more way out place if you tried, and it cost a fortune to build.
It was built to make a statement. It was built to make a statement about him.
What was your response, Justin, when you heard that he'd been murdered?
Devastated.
To understand the impact of Stevenson's murder at the time, it helps to know what Adelaide was like back in the day. Because in the 1970s, this conservative, old-school city was in the midst of a cultural revolution under its new premier, the dashing, debonair Don Dunstan.
At last, we've accomplished what people have been talking about in Adelaide for a very long time.
He had the look, he had the clothes, he had the fashion.
Premier is one of the men who really pioneered the safaris here in Australia. How practical are our hot weather clothes?
I think people should have a good sense of dress and of design.
We came out of the sleepy backwater city of churches into a vibrant sort of place. He liked fine food, he loved the cabaret, he loved the theatre. He changed Adelaide forever.
But not all of Dunstan's reforms were embraced by Adelaide's conservative society, especially his legalisation of homosexuality. Because this was an era when gay men were regularly beaten up at night in the city's parklands. The most shocking attack was on a university lecturer.
Dr. Duncan was thrown into the Torrens River near the university footbridge and drowned.
Very little is known about Dr. Duncan. He knew few people, and he was a homosexual.
And so to be outwardly gay in the late 70s was still considered risky, even for a top criminal barrister.
So just raise your arms up for us.
Before I start digging down into Derrance's case, there's something we need to do.
OK, David, test is about to begin. I'm now going to get you to close your eyes for us if you could.
David has agreed to take a lie detector test.
Don't move, and just remember to answer each test question truthfully. Is your first name David?
Yes.
Did you shoot Derrance Stevenson?
No.
Do you know for sure who shot Derrance Stevenson?
No.
Were you involved in hiding Stevenson's body in the freezer?
No.
OK, Dave, test is now over. I'll go through each question just in brief. The first one, did you shoot Derrance Stevenson? You answered no to that. And guess what? You were telling the truth on that one.
No doubt about it.
The second question, do you know for sure who shot Derrance Stevenson? You again answered no to that question. And you were telling the truth on that as well. The last one, were you involved in hiding Stevenson's body in the freezer? And that was pretty conclusive that you were not involved at all in that. So the bottom line, David, is you passed the test on all three questions conclusively.
I was watching you in the test and your shoes were moving, and I thought you may have been a bit nervous, no?
I don't think so.
Does that give you hopes for your case?
At the end of the day, most definitely. Just to have that added element of certainty. I think that's what's important.
This is you two here. Look.
Oh, wow. I look pretty little.
I think you were 2.5 or something. Look at this one. When he was 12.
Oh, wow.
He looks so angelic, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's cute.
David and I do share something in common, yeah. We both had partners who were murdered. When he was murdered, so 35, probably, I think, and you were 2. He had great dreams for us as a family. In my case, I was 32 years old. I was divorced. I had my daughter Louise. She was only 2 when I met Ron, and 4 when he went missing.
I seriously sometimes struggle to work out how she coped with a young child, single mum, freelance journo. How did people cope with something like that?
Ron, cheeky. Well, he was a larrikin. He was a good old Aussie larrikin, you know, blue eyes, twinkly, great fun. Nothing bothered him too much. He loved to party, he loved to laugh, he loved to drink. He'd take you down to the fishing boats and hoist you up in his shoulders, and you could have passed for father and daughter really easily. Was he the one? We certainly talked about getting married and having children, and that's such a great heartache for me, you know, to have one beautiful daughter, but I wanted 5. I wanted 5 children. You know, I was a real mum, and this didn't happen for me. The day he disappeared, we had a family party planned that night, and he didn't turn up. He wasn't there the next day, and by Monday, I was becoming frantic. I was angry with him too. Why would you miss a family party when everyone's here to see you? But then the anger changed very quickly to just raw anxiety. That's when the nightmare started. I think, you know, looking back, when they're missing, it's the pain and the wondering and the constant gnawing. Where are they? What's happened? Why would he leave me? Has he left me? Has he left me for another woman? Sorry, I could hardly sleep, and I just wanted him to come home. Sorry. Oh no. It was terrible. It was terrible. It never occurred to me that he was murdered. The house where Derrance was murdered was demolished years ago, partly to stop it becoming a ghoulish tourist attraction. David's agreed to meet me here to explain how the jury came to the conclusion that he shot his lover in the back of the head with his own rifle and then disposed of his body in the freezer. David, as you know, the house was razed about a decade ago, but the current owners are still so spooked about what happened here back in '79, they won't even allow us to film on this site, which is why we're standing back here on the footpath. It was regarded as a really unusual house, wasn't it, back in the day?
Oh, definitely for its time. I guess it had that notoriety because it was so indescribable. Some would say it looks like a collapsed tent.
David, can you tell me where the office, lounge and bedroom were?
Okay, Derrance's office was here.
Yep.
Next to Derrance's office was the reception area, and then on the opposite side was the lounge. Off the lounge was the bedroom, and opposite the bedroom was the kitchen.
Where did he keep the guns?
That was on the gun rack in the bedroom.
In the bedroom?
Yeah.
Who would keep guns on a bedroom wall? Were they under lock and key? Or?
No, certainly, back then, I don't think we sort of had the gun laws that we have now.
David, on the Crown case, according to them, you first of all, put a bullet in the back of Derrance's head, and then you single-handedly dragged the body through into the kitchen and you put the body in the freezer. And you're still a very slim build today. You were a young man then.
Yeah, well, back then I was 68. I think it was 68 kilos, and Derrance was 72.
Okay, so how did you
Yes.
take the body on your own and put the body in the freezer?
The judge in his summing up had said it was fireman fashion. You just toss it over the shoulder as if it's a fireman rescue.
As you do.
Well, I'm not a fireman, so...
Okay, Jess, so if David didn't murder Derrance Stevenson and haul his body into the freezer, what did happen? We need to go through from the morning of the 4th of June, 1979.
Okay, yep.
9 a.m, Derrance goes to work.
And what does David do?
David doesn't go to work because he doesn't have a job.
Yeah, that he slept.
Yep,
all
he
day.
says he sleeps till 2:40, which is the time that Derrance gets home. And they have tea and fruitcake together.
Okay.
4:40, a call from a guy called Mark Lawrence. They were on the phone for about 25 minutes.
Who's Mark?
Mark Lawrence, Derrance's lover, old lover, we think. Not sure yet. And possibly the guy who the police thought was about to muscle in on David Szach. David is seen driving Derrance's car between 5 and 5:20. He says he's out buying bread and milk. Next phone call we know was 6 o'clock. That was from Gino Gambardella, the chiropractor, Derrance's best mate.
Yeah, best mate, okay. And so 7:30, Derrance is invited around to have cake for Gino's wife, Mary's birthday.
But Derrance never arrives.
And the pathologist has the time of death as 4:45 to 8:45.
Problem is, that 6 o'clock phone call from Gino Gambardella, dead men can't talk.
So that means it's actually 6 till 8:45.
Which is a much narrower window, and it gives David Szach a much narrower opportunity. 6 to 8:45 p.m. Where does David say he was during that critical window of time? David, take me through the night of the murder.
Okay.
Where did you go when you left the house that night, David? You got in the car. Where did you go to?
I went to the State Liner bus depot in Franklin Street, which was about 10 minutes away.
What time was that?
That was just after 6 p.m.
This is where things start to get really sketchy. David was due to take the bus to Coober Pedy at 7:15 that night.
What's in Coober Pedy?
Derrance has got a business on the side, wheeling and dealing opals. David did some work for him. Derrance had paid for the bus ticket just the day before to send David back to work. David says that he suddenly changed his mind and said take the car instead.
Derrance said just take the car and go to Coober Pedy. And the first thing I needed to do was obviously cancel the ticket.
What did you do after that?
I then went to my parents' home.
For what reason?
I just wanted to pass some time, just to make sure that's what Derrance wanted me to do.
From his parents' house, David says he calls Derrance twice, but there's no answer.
So then he drives back to Green Hill Road. Why would you do that? And then he forgets to tell police.
Dodge on both counts. Why would you forget such an important thing? And secondly, he's on his way through to Coober Pedy. Why go back? What time did you get back to the house that night?
About 8:15.
And what did you do then?
I cleared up a couple of tea sauces and cake. We had afternoon tea, fruit cake and tea. Checked the bedroom, Derrance wasn't about, and that was it.
Why did you go back at all?
Because I wasn't really sure what it was that Derrance wanted me to do because of the suddenness of what he said for me to do.
So then David drives 900 k's through to Coober Pedy on Derrance's instructions, according to him.
Well, that's not that weird because That's where he worked.
It's a long way to go, Jess, in the middle of the night when you've never even done that drive in daylight by yourself. It's a monumental journey for an experienced driver, let alone an inexperienced one. Why would you do that? I think it's really suspicious. So what I've decided to do is to do that drive myself with David. All 10.5 hours of it.
What sort of car did Derrance have?
Dixon 260.
I don't know much about cars. What's that?
It was just a sleek, low sports car back in the day.
Sounds like a pretty flash car. Was it the sort of car that a car person would say, look, take this car and go through to the outback?
Oh, I couldn't really say, but it was certainly what Derrance had said to do.
A person looking at this, you can understand them thinking, David, or was he actually fleeing a murder scene?
Well, if one's fleeing a murder scene, they're not going to be drawing attention to themselves.
It's not sounding like a trip that I'd want to take.
Yeah, but then again, you're talking about this at your age, and I'm answering at the age I am now. But going back then, you're young, and you know everything's possible.
And so David pushes on through the night, but the conflicting accounts of what happens next will have a major bearing on his guilt or innocence for the jury. 100 k's north of Adelaide, he stops for fuel at Port Wakefield. This part of the story is important because of the testimony of 2 roadhouse workers who saw him that night. David, the evidence that was given at trial...
Yes.
...totally and utterly contradicts what you say happened at Port Wakefield. What time do you say you arrived in Port Wakefield that night in 1979?
Certainly before 10 p.m.
And what time did the service station attendant say you got here?
Just after midnight.
2 completely conflicting versions. One suits you, and one suits the Crown.
Indeed. Indeed.
And who did the jury believe?
They obviously believe the Crown's scenario.
One of the witnesses from here gave a very detailed description of what you look like and your clothes and the opal ring you were wearing.
Well, yeah.
He did give a detailed description. Yes. What were you wearing that night?
I was wearing a jacket, a white shirt, and I'm not sure if I was wearing grey trousers at the time.
Whose clothes were you wearing, your own or Derrance Stevenson's?
I think it was Derrance's jacket.
Well, tell me about the opal ring here. Were you wearing that here?
I wasn't wearing an opal ring until Cooper Pedy.
Why would a country bloke make up that you came in the red Datsun, dressed, you know, very sharply, and you were wearing a thumping great opal ring that no one could have missed?
Well, apparently his co-worker hadn't seen anything.
I'm not talking about his co-worker, I'm talking about...
I'm just making the point about that. I always look at it from the point of view that the evidence given was just too perfect.
The story at Port Wakefield just doesn't add up. 2 different times over 2 hours apart. It's just David's word against theirs. If you believe David, he left the house when he said he did, at around 8:30 that night. But if the witness is right, it means David could have stayed at the crime scene hours longer. And if that's the case, what was he doing there? I really need to find one of those service station attendants to hear what actually happened firsthand. After some gentle persuasion, I've convinced David's mother, Margaret, to talk to me. She's never spoken to the media before and agreed on the condition that we don't show her face. Margaret, why have you chosen not to be identified?
I feel after all these years, there are still young people in the family that I feel now might have an impact on their lives as well, and I don't want to put them in that position whatsoever.
And what was he like as a child?
Oh, look, I suppose I could say ordinary, but when I look back on it, no, he wasn't. He was always wanting to get things done very quickly. The one most unusual thing is that he didn't talk. He would say a few bits and pieces, but he seemed to be in his own world a lot of the time.
What about his dad? Tell me about Joe.
Well, Joe was a very definite sort of personality, being Ukraine. Emotionally, he would be a real downer. There was no doubt about that. We didn't communicate very well, and he didn't understand David being that, oh, just leave me be, I want to do this myself. That always caused a lot of clashes, a lot.
Why did he wear Derrance's shirts?
Well, because they were there and he liked them. And of course they were self-embroidered with the initials, which were exactly the same. So I suppose he was trying to live up to Derrance's image, if you want to put it that way.
Interesting, Margaret, that you ended up with an older man and so did David.
Yes, probably.
What did you think the relationship was then?
Now that's where probably I am at fault. Ashamed as I am to say it. Never said it out loud before. It suited me that David seemed to be happy with where he was, and there was not the same tension because he and his dad didn't get on.
Well, listening to you, Margaret, I don't think it's shameful at all. I think it's lovely that you're a mother and can admit that you made a mistake. We all make mistakes, don't we?
Yes.
Such a vast universe out there, isn't it? And we're driving all the way through it. This Australian outback, no wonder people are so fascinated by it and frightened by it.
Going on a road trip with a convicted killer is an interesting journey to make. And the inconsistencies in David's story are beginning to add up. What witnesses say, the physical evidence, and even David's own questionable actions.
So many abandoned buildings here. It looks like, you know, the opal industry has sort of half died and people have just picked up their picks and gone home. How do you feel being back here?
It was, you know, the place I lost my freedom.
There must be something really sad about that for you.
Oh, indeed, returning now, that kind of completes the circle, that this is where the tragedies began and the tragedies end.
I'm intrigued to know more about the connection with Coober Pedy.
It's like a cathedral in here. Is that sandstone?
Well, yep, it's just sandstone that they've worked their way through.
Derrance had a business on the side trading in opals, and he'd found David a job here as an assistant in the mines. David had been in Coober Pedy for nearly 5 months before he went back to Adelaide to have a break, just days before Derrance was murdered.
Yeah, a lot of effort went into constructing this, and
Just little caves.
we'll have that area there is what we're looking for.
Oh, my God. That's
Just
big.
there. We're going to very gently try to follow it and hopefully expose a little pocket.
It's labour intensive.
It is labour intensive.
So, according to David, Derrance wants him to return to the mines to keep an eye on a guy called Ross Christianos, and that's where this story takes a really bizarre turn. Who was Ross Christianos, David?
He was a close personal friend of Derrance Stevenson's.
And what did he do?
He was a opal miner, seller of jewellery overseas. I was only privy to one transaction, and that was about it.
Tell me about that.
That was an instance where Derrance had asked Ross to sell some jewellery overseas, and Ross had sold it and been paid with a cheque which subsequently wasn't honoured. And Derrance had to pursue that back through Scotland Yard.
How much was that worth?
I think the transaction value was about $25,000, so going back in 1979, 78, so.
He must have been absolutely ropeable to refer it to Scotland Yard.
Well, I think given that Ross had been his friend over some period of time, he would have felt, particularly disappointed.
I don't get a handle on Ross Christianos at all.
Okay.
Describe what he looked like.
Short, round and Greek with thinning hair, and he was married. I don't know if there had been an ongoing relationship between the two, but there was certainly an instance where Ross had came over early one morning and the both of them were in the bedroom.
Pardon me looking bewildered, but do you look back at that now and think that there was something a little odd with you living with Derrance Stevenson and then Ross Christianos having sex with him? I can assure you, if I'd walked in and found my partner in the bathroom
I was in a very bizarre set of circumstances, I guess, if you think about it. I think it was described as a very strange setup.
David, do you think Christianos had a motive to kill Derrance?
Derrance was murdered in a very brutal way, and if your suggestion was Ross one of several people, who knows? I don't know.
David, I'm getting the impression from you, as much as I'm trying to get your story, that there are things you're not telling me.
Well, everyone has that belief, but that goes back to the day when I was first charged, and I'm just placed in that position. Well, you have to know something.
David's story about Ross Christianos has knocked me for a 6, so I did some investigating. The opal miner has since died, but I did speak to his family, and they say they know nothing about a gay relationship. And although Christianos was investigated by police, he was dropped as a murder suspect. Which only leads me to ask, if Christianos didn't shoot Derrance Stevenson, surely David must suspect who did. But David gives nothing away, and what he does next really sets my alarm bells ringing. Having driven through the night and with still no word from his lover Derrance, David makes it a point to be seen wandering around Coober Pedy wearing the lawyer's favourite opal ring. Show me the ring that looks like the one that Derrance had.
Okay, let's see if we're going to be lucky.
See one?
Because it was rather a large stone. Okay, here. That stone there would be a very close approximation, but its setting was encased in gold. So if I take that out, just take that out and we'll pop it on my little finger. Get it out there.
Is that the finger you wore it on?
Yep.
Isn't that beautiful? Takes up almost half your finger.
It's certainly noticeable if you happen to be looking.
Why were you walking around Coober Pedy, which was known to be a pretty rough old town, with a thumping great ring like that on your finger?
I was just hamming it up. That's all.
Were you showing off?
Of course I was showing off. Why wouldn't I be?
This young buck from the city.
That's what I mean. Why wouldn't I be?
In a wild west town. Unless you want me to buy it for you, David, you better put it back. We'll be charged with theft. Both end up in the slammer in Coober Pedy. Then this story takes yet another sharp turn. Around mid-afternoon, David calls Derrance's home again and this time gets to speak to his secretary, who tells him that her boss has disappeared and he's missed a court appearance, which is really unusual. David then presents himself, of all places, to the police station. So you went to the police. When did you do that and why?
I think that was about lunchtime.
Yeah. What were you there for?
I had a matter, a criminal matter in the background, and it was just a case of showing some receipts to the police to
That was about the cheques?
That's correct, yeah.
OK, tell me about the cheques, because I'm really confused about them.
I bounced a couple of cheques for $800 or something.
What do you mean you bounced them?
I wrote them against a unfunded account.
Did you know it was unfunded?
Oh, probably. I don't know. You know, I would have just thought, well, I'll correct that, and never did anything about it.
So you knew you were being fraudulent?
Oh, definitely. I'm not saying differently about that, but you know, so I went to the police station to show that the monies had been repaid.
Jess, I've managed to track down Mick Standing. He's now retired. He's the former detective who arrested David in Coober Pedy. He's what I call a copper's copper, straight shooting, no nonsense, boy from the bush. Tell me about the day you first laid eyes on young David Szach.
Well, it was the first time I'd met anybody like him. He was totally out of place for a rough and tumble town like Coober Pedy was at that time. His mannerisms, the way he spoke. And what really looked strange was the way he was dressed. He wasn't dressed in a young man's clothes. Most of all, he had this huge opal ring on his finger.
What was his demeanour like?
I always have thought, to borrow a Shakespeare line, he was the man who protested too much. I think his words were, I want you to help me find my missing friend Derrance. No one knows where he is.
I think I said something about being in a relationship, but that would have just been, I was just trying to perhaps convey an urgency and being upfront. But I just wasn't a casual friend or anything.
What sort of car was David driving then?
Well, it was a sports car. I think it was a Datsun 280Z, one of those little low-profile, totally wrong sort of car to be driving in that part of the world in those days. With no bitumen roads, and the main highway was as rough as anything.
On reflection, could it have been that you were creating an alibi for yourself going to the police station? Because if you had murdered Derrance Stevenson and popped his body in the freezer, as it was later alleged,
suggested, yes.
Then you would be putting yourself right in the eye of the storm, wouldn't you, going to the police station?
I had a just reason to go to the police station.
It's not every day of the week that a young man walks into a police station dressed in another man's clothes, wearing another man's jewellery, driving another man's car.
What did you arrest him for?
Stealing Derrance's car. Legal use of the motor vehicle.
Mick Standing arrests David early on the evening of the 5th of June. By this stage, Derrance Stevenson has been missing for 24 hours. Back in Adelaide, Derrance's secretary raises the alarm and Detective Chief Superintendent Ken Thorson is called in. What do you say to people who suggest that there's something fishy about the Stevenson murder and that there's something fishy about David Szach's conviction for it?
Oh, they don't know what they're talking about.
The macabre circumstances surrounding his death were disclosed at a news conference at police headquarters this morning.
Ken, what was your role in the Derrance Stevenson murder inquiry?
I was in charge of the major crime squad at the time, and it was late in the afternoon that I got a phone call when I got home. And they'd been through the house, couldn't find Derrance, and the only place they hadn't searched was a deep freeze.
The partially clothed body was frozen solid in a crouched position when police prized open the freezer about 5 o'clock last night.
Jess, an artist mate of mine has drawn a sketch of what Derrance looked like when they opened the freezer lid. And what happened then? I
went to the house, and when I got there, the pathologist was already there, and Derrance was on the bed.
Why was he on the bed?
Because he'd been lifted out of the fridge.
Why would you lift someone out of the fridge onto a bed? Wouldn't you lift them onto the floor?
I don't know, I wasn't there at the time. But They could have well have been getting him into the position that they thought he was in when he was killed.
In a sexual position?
Well, I don't know what the sexual position would be for the male person, but I would say it was a bullet in the back of his head from remember.
A man is believed to have been staying in the Eastwood house at the time of Mr. Stevenson's death.
How premeditated do you think Stevenson's murder was?
Probably only a day or 2 days, something like that. It depends how big a surprise it was for him to get his marching orders.
Police took possession of 2 rifles to determine if they were connected with the murder.
Do you think that David Szach pulled the trigger?
Yes, I do.
Do you think he put the body in the freezer?
Yes, I do.
What do you think his motive was?
I think he may have thought that Derrance was trying to ease him out of his life.
No,
Tell me how they told you that he was dead.
Oh. I don't know, they were talking about the freezer. They said that his body had been found in the freezer, and then they said that I broke down for several minutes or a time, and then when I recomposed myself, they continued the interview.
David, I notice continually you talk about yourself in the third person.
But it's not so much, yeah, the police said to me...
Do you have a disconnect about this?
I don't so much have a disconnect, it's just that it's something that I'm always asked the same questions, and people are looking for answers that I can't give that level of detail to, because I wasn't making a mental note. Oh, it's going to be important to me one day.
Derrance was shot in the back of the head. What do you say about that, Mick?
Well, to me, that is a coward's way of doing things. If you're going to be stupid enough to want to kill someone, at least look him in the eye and do it.
If you show emotion, you're in a bad light. If you don't show emotion, you're in a bad light. So
you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I mean, your whole case, David, has attracted so much attention, hasn't it? And even all these years later, which is why we're doing this, people are still talking about it. Did you do it? Did you not?
I didn't do it. The truth is strangers in fiction, and why can't it just be left on that basis?
The trouble with David's story for me is it's just not all adding up. If you're concerned about what's going on in your lover's life, would you really head through to far-flung Coober Pedy, an outback town, and drive through the night for no apparent reason whatsoever, when you could have stayed around to see what's going on?
Or is it because the word on the street about Derrance was true, that the lawyer was linked to criminal activity and underhand dealings led to his murder, for which David became the fall guy?
Who is David Szach? To me, he's just a mystery, an enigma, you know, like the man behind the mask. I can't get a handle on him at all. I don't understand the way he talks sometimes. I don't understand his thought processes. I'm pretty good judging people, but I can't get him. I don't get him. I don't get it.
I still have so many questions about this case. Like, how does a high school dropout end up with a high-flying legal in the first place?
He just approached me on the basis that I'd be really good to photograph as a model and if I'd be interested.
What did 3 crucial witnesses see at the house on the night of the murder?
What was in the garbage bag?
Nobody knows.
What was in the attaché case?
Nobody knows.
How did South Australia's chief forensic pathologist bungle key evidence, which may well prove David's innocence?
If I were asked about the reliability of the formula, I would have said, in my opinion, it's bullshit.
And my own hunt to track down a killer.
He told me to back off and that I'd end up wearing cement boots.